Welcome to Electric Liberty Land, here on the Lions of Liberty podcast, your weekly shot of culture, comedy, and liberty with your host, Brian McWilliams.
Welcome, everybody, to Electric Liberty Land here on the Lions of Liberty podcast. And I'm excited today because I was over at the Austrian Economics Conference, the 10th annual Austrian Economics Conference in Vienna, before Vienna decided to lock down harder than anything you've ever seen in any other country as far as COVID protocols go. And I had the great pleasure of meeting a man who's joining me today, who I was fascinated to hear is a member of the Croatian Parliament. Stephen Bartulica is here with me. Stephen, welcome to Electric Liberty Land, and thanks for joining me.
Thank you very much for the invite, Brian. This is exciting for me. It's my first big-time podcast in America, so thank you very much.
Well, hopefully it's late there, so hopefully you're drinking some whiskey to calm the nerves. You know, it's early where I am. I didn't have anything in my coffee just yet.
7 p.m. here, yeah.
There you go. That's perfect drinking hour. Well, Stephen, so tell us a little bit. You know, you and I had met at the Austrian Economics Conference, which was fantastic, you know, put together by the Austrian Economics Center in Vienna, as well as Foundation Basis and our friend Federico, and of course, Barbara Combs. Wonderful. So we had a really fascinating time. And for me, it was amazing to see, compared to what we have here in the United States, which is where you originally are from. It was fascinating to see how many people from all over Europe were gathered there, the intellectual heft they brought, the economic success that they brought. I mean, what was your impression of it? And was that your first conference, or had you been going for a few years?
Yeah, thanks. It was a great event. It wasn't my first time. I've been cooperating with Barbara and her team in Vienna for many years now. The annual free market roadshow that they sponsor comes to Croatia every year. I host that event, and it's
wonderful.
It's a great privilege, and that whole roadshow has been growing. More and more cities take part. So I've been involved with that for about 10 years. I'm originally from Missouri, so your viewers should know I grew up just north of Kansas City on the border of Missouri and Kansas.
You've lost whatever Missouri accent you might have had, by the way.
That's what everyone tells me. That's what everyone tells me. My hometown is St. Joseph, Missouri. It's the most famous thing that happened in St. Joe is that Jesse James was killed.
Well,
that's my hometown.
Well, at least it's something. It's more than many cities can claim,
yes. Right? And by the way, for your viewers in California, the Pony Express in the mid-19th century, mail by horseback. It started in St. Joe and finished in Sacramento, I believe. So
there you go.
That's the other historical point. No, the event was very good, and I'm very pleased that we met. Barbara Colm has been a leading voice for a sound economic policy in Austria. It's tough going because the country unfortunately has a lot of socialist thinking still in its political elites, especially in the city of Vienna, unfortunately. So she knows more about that than I do. But unfortunately, Croatia isn't much different. I was initially attracted to this because I saw this readiness to take on the left and this creeping big government attitude that's been growing, unfortunately, in Europe. Croatia is a bit different. We had in the 90s the collapse of former Yugoslavia, and with that, of course, communism. So it was, for me, a rare historical moment, because rarely do you have in history a time when freedom almost overnight in a miraculous way grows for people. Usually it's the other way around. So the fact that the communists gave up power in most places peacefully is very unusual when we look at the human experience. And so I saw that as a great sign of hope. And I came over to Croatia in 1992 And I've been living here more or less ever since. I reside here in Zagreb, and the reason I've been cooperating with the Vienna Circle is my think tank has been promoting these same Austrian-based economic policies for some time now. We're, I would say a conservative outfit that is focused on limited government, protecting the family, but also we're pushing for less regulation, lower taxation, etc. And we see obviously a big problem in the European Union because countries like Germany are obsessed with standardizing these policies at the European level, where, in other words, Croatia, as a small country, would lose its fiscal freedom to have its own fiscal policy, tax policy. Our government now is keen on introducing the euro by next year. And that doesn't mean just losing your monetary sovereignty. It also means potentially losing, the levers of government that control fiscal policy as well.
Right. Well, it's interesting because I know that recently people had adopted this corporate international minimum wage or minimum tax level as well, which, to your point, when I looked at that, I said, okay, well, they're basically just completely obliterating smaller countries' abilities to take advantage of lower taxes for corporations to lure more economic benefit there. And to your point with this overarching regulation, it's the exact same thing. And it just does seem that these larger countries are running roughshod over people in smaller nations. And yet you do see people make these arguments to the contrary that there's only benefit to the EU, despite the fact that how many people in the EU are they're elected without representation. It's like, how many people does Croatia have in the EU advocating for them versus all these other massive countries? It just is mind boggling.
Yeah, we are an interesting case because our recent history, at least 20th century history, was very unfortunate. And we, after World War I, lost any type of political independence. Up until that time, we were part of the Austro-Hungarian empire, but we had some, I would say, autonomy, and we were part of the Western world, generally speaking. After World War I, it was basically downhill. After World War II, it got even worse with communism being enforced here. And so Croatia wanted badly to, move away from this traumatic past and join the European Union, like many other countries in Central and Eastern Europe after communism's collapse. The problem is that the country is now basically immersed in the Brussels bureaucratic machine, and our leading politicians lack the vision and, I would say, fortitude to push back on some of these policies. It's much easier for them to go along with what the older members and richer members of the EU say. And this brings me to this push for harmonizing tax policy, fiscal policies at the EU level. We have this post-COVID recovery plan, which is more or less financed through borrowing at the EU level. And this is unprecedented. So the EU as a entity is for the first time issuing bonds and raising money for its programs, and this money will be repaid all the way to 2058. So I tell my young Croatian constituents that, all you who are entering the workforce are going to be participating in repaying money that will be spent over the next 4 or 5 years. Little do they know, what's really, behind the scenes and how this deal was orchestrated. And so there's a lot of risks in this. Croatians tend to be, I would say, they have too much confidence in these, supranational structures, and I'm much more skeptical. And of course, there's always the danger of centralized power, as you said.
Yeah.
These unelected bureaucrats who aren't accountable to anyone are making far-reaching decisions on our behalf.
Well, what's shocking to me is that you've got a country, as you said, that emerged from an overarching, controlling, super governmental organization in the Soviet Union. They got their freedom. And
Yes.
yet, in such a short time, they've rushed to get back under the boot of a massive multinational
Yes.
organization that has taken away
Yes.
their individuality. I mean, how did
Yes.
this? I don't understand how this could happen so quickly. And then, second part of what I wanted to ask is, you mentioned younger constituents. So, do you see those younger people now pushing back? Because I seem to have seen more of this now as the next generation pushing back on this and saying no more of this.
Yes, there is some of that, but unfortunately, many of them are simply leaving the country. So one problem we have is this brain drain. We just recently had our latest census figures published, and the population has declined by almost 10% over
Wow.
the last 10 years. So we're it's an alarming trend, and it isn't just Croatia, it's many of the other poor EU members, have similar problems. But it's especially acute here. We're the newest EU member, and many of our young people who aren't patient or are unhappy with the crony system that we have in Croatia itself are looking elsewhere. Ireland, for example, and of course Germany and countries that are closer, Austria. But they're continuing to leave. The ones that are staying, I'm hopeful, will be very vocal in pushing back. One of the reasons for this, push into the EU, I think, can be explained by what I would describe as a inferiority complex. Croatians have this sense that we have to make up for a lot of lost time. Of course,
it's like the Napoleon syndrome a little bit there too. Small country, we want to be respected and on the world stage.
It's kind of a Rodney Dangerfield complex. Gets no respect.
Right.
We deserve, I think, more respect. It's a great country that fought a fierce war of independence. And against all odds was able to defend its territory and later liberate its territory in 1995. That could be a topic for Hollywood filmmakers, because it was really a dramatic struggle in 1991. But since then, I think your point, we should value our freedom and sovereignty more than we do. And we should have more, as time goes on, self-confidence in running our own affairs. That's what I see. As an MP, I am pleased to say I'm the first American-born MP that's been elected here in Croatia. And it's an honor for me, really an honor, to serve the Croatian people. But I would say that we need to, really cultivate this attitude that we can run our own affairs. We don't have to, by default, follow the lead of these bigger countries, because frankly, what's a priority in Germany or France doesn't necessarily have to be a priority here.
Right, exactly. And by the way, so tell us a little bit more about how you got to be the first American PM in Croatian history, because you said you moved over there, you were inspired. And when you moved over there, was it just that you were inspired by, as you said, this freedom, this initiative, this opportunity that was presented as they broke off from the Soviets, and then later on, a few years, gained, of course, with the war, gained their sovereignty, defended your territory? Was that the inspiration for you going there? Was it that you met somebody beautiful? Croatia, by the way, I know a little something about the ladies there, just having been to Olympic Games. Croatian has unbelievably beautiful women, just as a whole, unbelievably beautiful. Yes. So what inspired you to go over there, and how did you become this PM? How did you convince these crazy Croatians to vote for an American that's probably even crazier than they are?
That's an interesting question. I maybe have lost my Missouri accent, but I still speak Croatian with a heavy
No,
accent
really.
from abroad. So they
So you
know
have
I'm
no
not.
you have no accent home anymore.
No, they know I'm not homegrown here. They know I'm kind of a foreigner. But it's a combination of things. I did meet my wife later after several years, and I have a family here with 4 children in Zagreb. But initially, it was more of my imagination running wild. I was 22. I'm lucky now when I look in hindsight that I had no student loans to repay. So I had an undergrad degree without any student debt. So
Mhm.
that was probably something that I, in hindsight, am very grateful for. That I could afford to actually, be patient and stay in a country that was, going through a very difficult time in the early 90s.
Yeah.
But I will say, at a personal level, I was very inspired by the effort of so many. Um, young people who were living, their, everyday lives, and then suddenly were confronted with, an ominous threat to their livelihood, to their, existence, and they stood up, and many were really, heroic in this struggle for independence, and they weren't. Professional soldiers. They were
Mhm.
fighting literally for their towns and villages. And so I felt, in a way, a moral obligation to do something. Many of them became close friends of mine through the years. And so that's one thing that, I should say that, when we compare with other countries in Central Europe, Croatia paid a very high price to gain its independence through this war. And it was actually occupied until 1995. So part of this
Mm.
time, even in May of 1995, the capital city was shelled by the center of the city was shelled by Serbs who were only about 40 miles away. And
Mm.
so you had civilians being killed in the center of Zagreb at 10 a.m.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
so, it could have been me. It could have been me. I was, here at the time walking the streets. And so it was still a very precarious time. But when I look back now, 30 years later, it was really a unique historical moment that kind of, when you look at the American experience, Croatia went through its founding, just 30 years ago, and has achieved its own statehood after centuries. And so,
Mhm.
what's more kind of remote for your average American, what happened in the late 18th century,
Yep.
happened recently in Croatia. So we had fascinating discussions about national identity, about what it means to be a Croatian, how to cope with the communist legacy. We didn't. We didn't implement this policy of lustration like Eastern Germany did, for example, where the former communists, basically, who were in positions of power, judges, or in the secret police, they weren't able to hold public office after
Yeah.
the
Seize
change.
those power reins back.
Here in Croatia, we didn't go through anything similar. So basically, what I have to say is that former communists were running the show, basically here, and the privatization process. It's interesting from a philosophical point of view. Marx, he taught that his ideology would create kind of a new noble man who would be
Mhm.
unselfish and not greedy and not interested in property. But the fact is that what I've seen firsthand is that the communists, once the system collapsed, were very interested in property, very, very
Oh yeah.
interested in grabbing as much as they could. So it was basically a big lie. I would say to your younger viewers who are, maybe worried about this creepy socialism in America, that they should look carefully at the evidence and what these other countries went through, because it wasn't a pretty picture.
Oh, for sure. Well, and there's a couple things I wanted to pull from what you just said. Number one is that experience of experiencing somebody shelling you, experiencing walking through the streets and actually being attacked is something that as you said, Americans have no concept of, unless you've actually gone off to war and been shipped off to God knows where, as our military and our domestic, foreign policy likes to do, ship people off to destinations that really don't impact us directly,
Causing a lot of harm.
causing
Yes.
untold harm to millions.
Yeah.
But the everyday American, really, other than 9/11, has no concept of being attacked and has very little risk of being attacked. So when we have these foreign policy decisions made, the everyday American, it's as though it's a different world, a different reality, as opposed to somebody in Croatia that has experienced that direct conflict recently. The second thing I want to talk about is you mentioned this transition into the privatization, and I'm fascinated to hear how that went coming out, because we look to people that they go, well, how would you live without government? And, we can look at Somalia, which had overarching, benefit from it with little access. The only downside was a little bit of a downtick in water access. But, this is a government that dissipated. And how did the people of Croatia respond? As you said, the communists tried to seize power and land, but how did the overall economy rebound? How did people adapt? Hey guys, a quick commercial break here. Sponsor break for two libertarians, Vanessa Abelar and her husband, Carlos, two libertarians who run a CBD company you're going to enjoy. That is Paloma Verde CBD. Let me spell that for you so you can know where to find it. PALOMAVERDE CBD.com. Now, you can use the promo code ROAR to get 25% off your order of $75 or more. Free shipping though, so that's awesome, to help support libertarian causes, libertarian entrepreneurs, and also this show. Let me tell you about these products. These are premium grade, THC free, and with mostly organic ingredients. They've got some mink tinctures that are fantastic, onset about 20 minutes, last 4 to 6 hours, guys. Green apple gummies, also strawberry lemonade. Those will last about 6 to 8 hours as well. Fast-acting everyday soft gels, 10 milligrams. Those will hit you fast and hard if you're in pain, if you need some relief quick. And of course, they also have their salves. I'm looking forward to this. Mark is still hoarding it. I'm going to go over and non-aggression principally, punch him in the face. But I do want to use this salve on my sore knee, this eucalyptus lavender salve. But anyway, guys, check them out. Great company. Support libertarianism, support us, and support them. Go to palomaverdecbd.com. Remember, use that promo code ROAR for 25% off your order of $75 or more and free shipping.
Well, it's I could talk for hours about this because it just was a great showcase of human nature. Really, you see what human beings are programmed for, what we're like, and what a backward system can do that distorts reality and undermines virtue. Really, it was a big lie, and people were rewarded for going along with it. So you could just get in trouble if you spoke the truth, or if you refuse to yield to pressure from the party. So there was a lot of conforming. Unfortunately, people got used to living under that system. Many people fled, like my parents, of course. They left communist Yugoslavia to come to America. But the ones that stayed behind were, I think, treated so unjustly, and they're victims, whether they like it or not. It's a painful reality for many, this kind of introspection, to look back at your personal life, because they didn't live in a free country. They weren't able to speak their opinions, to grow really as free human beings. And so it's a sad story, but the good news is that when it collapsed, there was enough there was enough strength in the society that we got by even through a war without major government, you would say, intervention. The economy was basically falling apart, being privatized. Even more dramatically in neighboring Bosnia and Herzegovina, where the Croatian part, in southwest Bosnia, it's the part of Bosnia called Herzegovina, where predominantly Croats live. They had literally no institutions, no functioning institutions in 1992. The country was completely dedicated to this war effort. And what I can say is that from a libertarian point of view, it vindicates, this experience there vindicates this view of very limited government. In other words, where you have intact families, where you have children being raised by both father and mother, where you have low crime, where you have basically a solid work ethic and basic honesty. You don't need big government. Many businesses grew during this time because there was almost no taxation. They weren't paying taxes to anyone. They were just trying to survive, and maybe paying a monthly fee to fund the military, and that was done on a very informal basis. There were no laws in force.
I was going to ask on that. Sorry to interrupt you, but that was the other thing is we talk about as well. This massive military spending budgets we have, and how the average liberal will argue that we don't need guns because why would an American need a gun? And also that a gun will not defend you against the government. But here we've got an example of privatization, of people finding their way, of creating an economy when the government collapses, and winning a war, defending their territory without a massive military backing behind them.
But I would say it is also a vindication for the Second Amendment, because if there's no right to bear arms and only the state has the right to use force, then Croatians would have simply been destroyed. Completely destroyed, because all the weapons, legally speaking, were on the Serb side. And so it is an argument for self-defense. Many of these weapons that were being acquired were being bought illegally on the black market, because there was an embargo being enforced on the country. And so it was really a tremendous effort to even acquire the necessary arms to defend ourselves, and this was done in really remarkable ways, very very resourceful. But I will say it is an argument for the Second Amendment, because had we not armed or had the right to defend ourselves, basically we would have been overrun by the communist Yugoslav army. That's the simple fact. But it is a case where, again, I would say if you have, a functioning family structure, more or less, and you have, basic personal responsibility and self-reliance, people not looking to the government to bail them out, or this, not this entitlement attitude that exists, unfortunately, in the United States as well. You can thrive even under, very difficult circumstances. So many of the best companies today that are doing well in Bosnia and Herzegovina emerged during this period. There was, still a possibility to trade with Croatia, with other countries. It wasn't easy, but many of them, because of very low regulation, obviously, and taxation, were able to build up their own companies. And society did not fall apart, even though the country around them was basically non-existent, didn't have any institutions to speak of. Croatia was a little different. I will say that this tendency for, closed behind the scenes deals, crony deals, being, managed by people who knew each other very well and were more than willing to leverage their positions of influence. That was happening on a large scale. So it was very, when you look back now, not transparent, not fair. Your average Croatian coming from America or Canada or Australia with capital who wanted to invest was not playing on a level playing field at the time, because there were so many insider deals, and that goes for all the countries in Eastern Europe, not just Croatia. But we've now, I would say, consolidated. I would say there's not enough economic freedom still. We still have a lot of of our GDP controlled by the state, and we have too many public companies that are controlled by the politicians. So I'm fighting this battle. Basically, it's typical free market fight. I like to use the term free economy, not so much capitalism. Capitalism is almost like a dirty word here
Yeah,
because
I know. They've made it. The Democrats, or I should say the Democrats, the progressives have made it fairly successful to demonize capitalism without delineating crony capitalism versus real capitalism. So I think that's a good idea to shift
it's
that.
basically crony capitalism is what it is
Right.
in Croatia.
Yeah, well, everywhere for the most part. When we look at the U.S. and really anywhere, it's crony capitalism run roughshod, especially during COVID. But tell me a little bit more about some of the specific things you're trying to do in Croatia. And I still need to hear. See, this has been a fascinating conversation, which is, I got my bullets I want to hit because I still want to hear how you got elected.
Well,
But so do you want to tell me about that first, or do you want to tell me about what you're working on now that you are elected?
well, I will just say my main action item on the legislative front is a bill I'm planning to propose in the parliament, designed to protect free speech on social media. So I'm very alarmed by the level of censorship by these fact checkers, especially during the COVID epidemic. It's very bad. People are not able to read, alternative views or opinions on how to combat this COVID virus. It's basically an official narrative that's being, repeated on a daily basis by the government and people in the media. And so I'm very concerned by this, and I want to rein in the power of these fact checkers, because it is a basic right, constitutionally protected right, that you can share your opinions, even if they may be wrong. On occasion, you have a right to express them and not be censored by these anonymous fact checkers who are not scientists, who are not experts in the field of epidemiology.
They're
And so
activists for the most part.
Activists.
Government
They're
stooges are activists.
and they don't conceal their bias, for the left. They don't conceal it. So it's something on my mind. And even, it's a small country. People say, how are you going to take on these big tech giants? I think, Croatia can, in fact, provide an example for others if we can, work out legislation that addresses this in a proper way, because it's really a tremendous abuse of power, I would say.
And again, I have to go back to the fact that we're talking about a country which, again, you'd think the population would demand an independence and a freedom of speech, knowing what government narratives do, knowing how much government lies coming from, again, the communist environment, the Soviets, where it was one narrative, no ability to speak out, no ability to speak your mind, even as you were discussing earlier. You'd think this would be a passionate point for most people in Croatia to say, we have to have this ability.
It is for some. It is for some. But I will say it's ironic. But in a way, this kind of soft totalitarianism is more difficult to fight than communism was. Communism was very unattractive, and it was in many ways brutal. You were simply, arrested or even killed if you were on the wrong side of an argument. Even inside the Communist Party, there were purges where communists themselves ended up in prison or killed. So it was a very ugly reality, and that on its own created a lot of resistance. But it's much more difficult to fight these big tech giants, the Google and YouTubes of the world, because they don't present such an awful face, at least at first glance. And so it's
right.
kind of a more
free
difficult...
services everybody uses and loves, and the fun
exactly.
logo, hiding.
Exactly.
It's like Darth Vader. It's like Darth Vader used to be Luke Skywalker. Everybody, or not Luke. He used to be whatever, Luke's father, whatever his name was, Anakin Skywalker. Yeah, and then he turned into Darth Vader. Turns out there's a dark side to that.
There is a dark side, and I would say that Croatians should be more awake to this danger than they are. Many of them maybe are just afraid, and they don't want to to bother with this. I will say it was one of the reasons I got into politics. To answer your question,
Mm-hmm.
my profession is teaching. I am a professor of political philosophy here at a Catholic university. It's also a relatively new institution, about 10 years old, and that's
Okay.
what I was doing for a living up until this election in 2020. And I thought again, why not? If I'm elected, maybe I can leave a mark and make at least a small difference. So after speaking with my family, I decided to enter the campaign, and I realized, it is a country still of with many problems, but also opportunity. I will say I had a happy life in America, but it was difficult to imagine me being elected to Congress or the Senate, coming from a relatively small city in Missouri. But here, that kind of possibility obviously is not just in your imagination. And I had a very, I would say, a forward-looking campaign. I was talking about how I imagine Croatia in the future, that I dream of it as a country where success won't depend on party membership or to connections in the government, but on merit and on hard
Mm-hmm.
work. And that obviously resonated with a lot of people. They had known my views from the past, also on different issues where I was quite outspoken as a academic.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a different world in politics, and I'm obviously following what's going on, in the world and here on a regular basis. You have to be media savvy because much of the media establishment isn't sympathetic to my point of view on economics. They tend to lean more to the left, also on social issues. But I would say my success has been is due to being sincere. I
Mm-hmm.
really speak what I believe, and I do that consistently. And I think the journalists and people, everyday people, know that. And so I have really, I would say, there's two kinds of politicians. Nigel Farage once, I was watching an interview on Brexit, and he said there's two kinds of politicians. The first, and it's the bigger group, they want to be somebody. And that's
Mm-hmm.
their motivation for entering politics. The other group is much smaller. They're the people who want to actually do something and aren't so interested in power as such. And I think his example with the Brexit fight, he doesn't hold any high position in Britain today, but he almost, just by the power of his arguments and his personality, led this push to get the country out of the EU, which is a huge achievement. So I
Mm-hmm.
think that I would like to think of myself as a politician who wants to do something. If I stay in politics, that's fine. If I go back to academia, that's also fine. But I'm in this fight to actually, to try to make a difference and move the country in a better direction, and with more opportunity and economic freedom.
Well, I will say I'm sad to hear that for your campaign you didn't lean into being a American from Missouri. Six guns, hat, ride on the horse into the the campaign sessions. But that's your choice. I don't know the Croatian environment. But one of the things I
I
was
might
curious
do
to hear
that
about.
next time. That's an interesting idea. I might do that next time.
Right, it'd really make a statement to people. But I'm curious to hear. As you said, the media is going to be very left leaning. I think no matter what, it's a universal, right? It's just the media is left leaning, and so many people in so far as how they imbibe media now choose to get their media from specific sources that buy into that. But what I'm curious to hear about is, in the United States, so many times, no matter what topic you're trying to argue against, no matter what your policy perspectives are, they will come at you with the same derogatory attempts to discredit your character. Now, in Croatia, I was curious to see, what do they do? Do people come at you with attacks? Can they call you racist? Is there enough of a diversity in there that they can call you racist, or do they come at you with other barbs and jabs to undermine your position, or do they actually attack you on what you're speaking to?
Wow, that's such an interesting question because I'm following closely what's happened in America, and I must say I'm shocked at the shift in the environment since I lived there in the early '90s. So it's almost completely not just one-sided, but the debate many times is just incoherent. You're just
Yeah.
listening to labels being thrown around, people being smeared, and so it's a very unfortunate and very dangerous, I would say, for the country. That the public square looks as it is in America. It's not. I would say the worst places are obviously these university campuses where they're
Yeah.
completely out of control and indoctrinating students at our expense. Taxpayers are funding this, and they're still collecting, huge amounts in tuition to indoctrinate these young Americans. It just seems,
Yeah.
beyond belief. I would say here there's less possibility to label me because we have a different background. Croatians it's more or less a homogenous country with over 90% of the population are Croats, and so
Hmm.
we have a few ethnic minorities, but they're also European, white, and so there's no really racial angle
Yeah,
you
you
can
really have
play.
to get into the real nitty gritty if you want to attack somebody on that.
Yeah,
You
you
hate
can't play,
redhead Croatians,
yeah, you can't play the race card so easily.
Right.
Here, I will say that the label conservative was at one point still out of the mainstream, and it was something new, and it was a term that under communism seemed very, out of just basically out of date, and something that
Hmm.
wasn't in any way a positive, but that's changed. And so, the media now commonly refers to, voters as conservative or different politicians as conservative. That wasn't the case 10 years ago. So I'm pleased with that development. But, it's difficult when, what you say. Basically, I would say two things. Socially, Croatians tend to be still quite conservative, so
Hmm.
I can make my arguments defending the natural family, or even defending marriage as a union between a man and a woman. That's politically still safe territory in Croatia, unlike
Hmm.
other places. But economically, when you come to economics, it's different. Even people who are socially conservative tend to expect the government to manage their lives, unfortunately. So if you're
Wow.
making arguments from the economically liberal point of view, and you're advocating for less government, and for example, our healthcare system has not been reformed. It's still run by the government. It's one, you pay in these monthly these health insurance payments to the state, monopoly. There's no
Hmm.
choice, and it's a lot of money that's being mismanaged. It's very inefficient. But as soon as I make the argument that this monopoly is not a good arrangement and we need to deregulate, I get attacked for being American. There's this, prejudice, this view that in America, if you're not employed by a big company, that you're basically going to die if you
Right.
get
Dead in the street,
put in the
propped up
street.
against more dead
That's
bodies in the pit.
that's the imagination of your average Croatian. And so,
Right.
being from America, that puts me in an even more difficult position, because essentially, I have to persuade people that dismantling the current system is to their advantage, and their
Mhm.
intuitions speak otherwise. It's completely against their intuitions.
I always find that whenever people are really advocating for a government run healthcare, one of the most potent arguments that can be made is survival for cancer rates. Because you see that in the United States, people can always bash the system and say that the privatization is a problem or that people can't get care if they need it. But the cancer survival rate in America is like the best in the world, and it outpaces any government system, even the NHS in the UK, who everybody loves. They always point to it as the model. We have 5 times the cancer survival rates because people can get access. They can get those services quickly. Yes, you're going to go into debt. Would you rather be not in debt and be dead, or in debt and be alive? You know, it's a very simple choice for people.
or as far as I know, I don't know if it's still the case, but I know that with Canadians, the Canadian government-run healthcare, they can, in a way, afford this luxury of an inefficient system because they're right next door to America. So if they need a surgery quickly, they can go across the border and get treatment if necessary. Other countries, you don't have that luxury. I would say that, my father's a retired doctor. I have a brother who's a practicing physician back in Missouri. And I tell people here and when I'm on television, when the king of Saudi Arabia, needs treatment, he doesn't come here. He doesn't go even to another European country. He goes to the United States. That's where he goes.
Right.
That's not just a coincidence. It's not a coincidence. So if we want, more better treatment for dollars invested, we need to look at, countries where this has actually been applied. And I lived in Germany for several years. My firstborn son was born in Berlin. We had very good treatment, and it was better probably than in Croatia at the time. This was 20 years ago, but it was still, I would say, under the average hospital in the United States still. Mm-hmm. So God bless America, and I'm I've heard lots of stories from friends about the disaster of Obamacare, and so I think what the average Croatian doesn't know is that how much the healthcare system is regulated in the United States today. They're not even aware of this shift and the billions and billions spent on Medicare and Medicaid and so on. But I would say that we need to, as free market advocates, we need to think carefully about how we make the arguments in the public square, because here it will now be an urgent issue in Croatia, especially after COVID. It's been in a very bad situation. When we look at the mortality rates in Croatia compared with similar countries in Europe, our mortality rates are quite high. And some of that is because the older population was not vaccinated in time, people over 70. But I would say, when we look at the care in general, I pay quite a bit of money every year for healthcare, and I get very little out of it. Maybe my children, get basic care at their, pediatrician's clinic, but otherwise, it's waiting in long lines, paying a private clinic for a test or a checkup because you don't want to wait. So we pay 2 or 3 times because it's so inefficient.
Yeah, that's what I've heard many times over from a lot of countries with similar scenarios. By the way, while we're talking about COVID, and I know I said we were going to do 45 minutes, but let's just go the whole hour. I have to do a hard cutoff because I have a work call for my real job, in about 10-15 minutes. But this is a great conversation, so I don't want to stop. Let's talk about COVID.
You're a natural host. You're doing this very well, Brian.
Oh, thank you. Well, I flattery will get you right in back to fight on the show anytime you want. Just keep the flattery going. No, but let's talk about COVID and what did Croatia do as far as protocols? Did Croatia do a hard lockdown like they did in the UK or like they did here for a couple of weeks, or did they do the Swedish model of, look, we're going to take precautions, but we're not going to destroy our economy. Let's keep going with daily life.
Yes, the government, I would say, flirted with the idea of a lockdown, but in the end resisted. At least they didn't go as hard as other countries, including neighboring Slovenia, but also Austria, which has been terrible. In Germany and many of these other countries, horrific. And now they have mandatory vaccinations. It's really
they've gone harder on the vaccination front, even as the virus has gotten less severe. They're tripling down on it. It's just it's anti-science. It's insane.
Yes, it doesn't make any sense. and it's very, I would say, irresponsible. Croatians, we were lucky in a way that the government, initially there were some, travel restrictions. This was in the first year, 220, as things. So I remember at Easter time, almost 2 years ago, people weren't allowed to go to mass. People were at home for Easter, so it was kind of a lockdown which lasted several weeks, and then that was lifted quite quickly. I think already in May. Since then, we fared pretty well. I shouldn't be too critical of the government's handling of this, although they did introduce last fall these COVID, the COVID pass. You either get vaccinated or you have to get tested regularly in order to go to public, enter public buildings and so on. Now, I thought this was a very bad idea. It was already being, enforced in many other countries, and the numbers look terrible. Terrible despite these measures. So I think they were counterproductive, certainly counterproductive, and basically gave these vaccinated people a false sense of security, that they wouldn't contract the virus or spread it. And in fact, that hasn't been the case. And so even in our hospitals, I think the virus has been spreading because of vaccinated doctors and nurses and healthcare workers who are able to come and go as they please under this arrangement. So that's also anti-science, but it was very difficult to make the arguments. And in the end, in Parliament, when we were debating this, the final kind of argument that the health minister was invoking was that these other countries are doing the same thing, but it's not working. I was saying, why just because Germany and Austria are doing something, why should we follow? That seemed to be his line of thinking.
Right. You see how those guys are failing? Why aren't we failing better?
Yeah, exactly. So if you look at it economically, Texas shouldn't be following California's example on economics. They should stay the course and welcome companies that are leaving California, obviously.
Yeah. Well, one more question for you, and then we'll wrap up. And I want you to tell people where they can find you and follow you, talk about the think tank you're a part of. But in regards to what's happening in America right now, we have the director of the CDC refusing to condemn statements made by a Supreme Court justice during a recent hearing about vaccine mandates for the population in the workforce, where she just had blatant incorrect facts, and the CDC director wouldn't correct her when asked on any pressing issues of data points regarding people with COVID versus from COVID in hospitals, childhood rates of COVID, vaccinated versus unvaccinated, all of these things. The CDC director will not answer questions and simply says, go get vaccinated again and again and again and again. Is it any different with the Minister of Health in Croatia? Are they more forthcoming? Are they willing to answer questions?
No, it's the same. It's the same, I would say, attitude. And I would say it's just a kind of lazy, bureaucratic attitude where they are accustomed to not being, there's not enough hostility, I would say, in the media towards these, officials, some of them unelected, who are, controlling our lives. And if there was more pushback in the media, I think they would have to be more forthcoming. But they get away with this, and the media is on board with this narrative, as I said, unfortunately. And it's remarkable. It's remarkable because, I think Facebook has here. It's a very important media platform, especially for conservatives. That's why I'm going to, try to introduce legislation to regulate this whole sphere, because it's not regulated. Basically, these fact checkers do as they please. No one asks any questions, and they're abusing their power on a daily basis. In America, I think it's clear. I use the argument really of Florida here. And I said, in America, we can see and compare these different approaches to the epidemic and see what's working and what's not working. And clearly, Florida has benefited from this more lax, liberal approach. And I commend Governor DeSantis for his fortitude and his willingness to stay the course, despite all of this, because it's not an easy thing. But here, I would say we have had several outspoken authorities on the issue. One scientist who quickly became a dissident inside this, official body that was advising the government, and he's been very effective in producing evidence showing that, for example, this latest strain is not dangerous and that vaccines are not working. And, the European Union has ordered over 4 billion doses of vaccines up through to 2023. So the question is, who do they plan on vaccinating? Because there seems less and less of a point to get the shot. So government, again, causing more harm than good. That's my main message. Lots of these decisions that are designed to benefit us or protect us actually do more harm than good. That's, again, been the case in this epidemic. It's the case over and over again in economics, in foreign wars, you name it. Government just, causes lots of problems. And that's what, the politicians are good at, kind of playing the game, really, like I said, spending money recklessly and not being held account. And so that's what I'm trying to do, kind of raise the standards of the discussion and reminding people of this, age-old truth that, governments, despite, their best intentions, cause a lot of harm. And I think COVID is really a very good case in point. And I commend Sweden and these other countries who resisted all this pressure and have done reasonably well, I would say very well, and have not, disrupted, the lives of their people.
Yeah, and I agree completely. I think I'm very, as they say, white-pilled, a positive on the outlook coming out of COVID. I think the last year, everything that's happened has woken more people up. I think it's going to be inspiring to a generation that it's going to be a defining point where we're going to see more freedom, more liberty, more privatization, and pushback against government narrative and censorship because of this. So I'm very excited for it. And it's funny, you talk about government creating problems. Well, naturally, they have to create problems, because if we didn't have any problems, what would we need government for? To solve the problems.
Well, there you go. I mean, I teach my students on a regular basis on, the American experience. And when I tell them, for example, that there was absolutely no income tax, federal income tax in the United States up until, I think, 1913 or something like that.
Yeah.
They're really shocked. It's difficult for them to even imagine that a country was able to prosper for so long without that kind of federal taxation. So, we just have to learn, from history and have faith in, the ingenuity of people, of everyday people, who, when they're allowed to freely work out their lives and to use their talents in a responsible way, countries prosper. And look at China. It's still a communist tyranny. It's still harassing its people, mistreating them, but they know that, there's no alternative to, a private property and allowing people to invest and to make money. The irony is that all these people in the United States who believe that China would change and become more liberal with this engagement and this trade with China, the opposite really has happened. Unfortunately, the United States, through a censorship of big tech, in China, it's the Communist Party that does the censoring. But in America, it's corporations, but the end result is the same. You have less freedom, you have more control over the debate. And so that's one thing I really regret, that America in some ways looks more like China than the reverse.
I completely agree. Well, I think that if people, what if they've heard today from you, your story, and I think you've given people on the libertarian and conservative side of things great arguments moving forward, talking about Croatia, talking about how you said this is a pure vindication of Second Amendment rights, of the ability to thrive without government, the ability to win wars without government. I think there's so much today that we talked about that my audience is just going to absolutely love. So tell them, where can they find you, where they can follow you, etc.
My Facebook page is Stephen Nicola Bartulica. Stephen Nicola Bartulica. My NGO is called Centar za obnovu kulture. It's on the screen. It's cok.hr is the website, and we're also on Facebook doing events. We have the Free Market Roadshow, the Croatian leg in May. So I'll extend an invitation now. I have the date. It's May 11th. If you can make it into your schedule, you're more than welcome to come here to speak in May.
I would love to come and speak. I will try my best to get over there, and I appreciate
we'll
the
go
invite.
To the coast. I'll throw in some perks. We'll go to the coast for a couple of days after the event.
I love it. And as you know, I've seen Croatia. I was talking about the women earlier, but I'll tell you, I watched Below Deck, which is a show about sailing on yachts, and they were in Croatia this past season. And oh my God, I didn't even know how beautiful it was. It's unbelievable.
Fantastic.
Well, thank you, Stephen. This has been absolutely fascinating. And for my audience out there, I will link to everything Stephen just talked about on the show notes page, which is at lionsofliberty.com/episodes/ELL263. So I'll put all those links in there and in the show notes that you'll listen to on the podcast. Stephen, it was a pleasure. I look forward to hopefully seeing you in Croatia, but if not, we'll definitely have to have you back on the show. And thank you for everything you're doing for me, for liberty, and for the wonderful people of Croatia.
Okay. Thank you very much, Brian. God bless. Goodbye.
All right. And for you guys out there, so that's it from me, from Stephen, from the Lions of Liberty, and from Electric Liberty Land. Always stay plugged in to liberty.